My brother's wedding gift from our parents was a down payment on a house. Mine was a card with $50 inside and a note that said, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." I kept the card. I still have it, in a shoebox under my bed. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe I always knew I'd need proof. I'm 31 now. I've been trying to figure out how to tell this story for a long time, because every time I start, I sound bitter, and I hate sounding bitter. But a lot happened last fall, and I think I finally have enough distance to say what actually happened without my hand shaking. So, here we go. My brother is 3 years older than me. His name is Scott. No, wait, I'm not going to use his real name. I'll call him my brother, because that's all he ever really was to me. A role, not a person. My parents are the same. They're just my parents, my mother and my father. Because in this story, that's how they functioned. As institutions, not as people who knew me. I grew up in the kind of house where love was transactional, but no one ever said that out loud. My parents never told me they loved my brother more. They never sat me down and said, "He matters and you don't." It was quieter than that. It was the kind of thing you figured out slowly. The way you figure out a house is drafty. Not all at once, just a slow, bone-deep cold you eventually stop trying to explain to anyone, because what would you even say? My brother was the one they drove to practice. I took the bus. My brother was the one they sat with when he struggled in school. I figured things out on my own, or I didn't figure them out at all. When I was 17 and had already been accepted to a state school on a partial scholarship, my mother said, and I quote, "Don't get too comfortable. College changes people." She didn't say that to my brother when he left 2 years later. She cried at his front door. I watched from the kitchen window. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this because it's the only way the rest of the story makes sense. I put myself through school, partial scholarship, work study, and a lot of federal loans I am still paying off every single month. My parents contributed nothing, not a dollar. I didn't ask them to, because by the time I was 18, I had already learned that asking my parents for things led to conversations that made me feel worse than not having the thing in the first place. So I didn't ask. I just worked. I waitressed all 4 years of college. I graduated with a degree in accounting, $22,000 in student debt, and the absolute certainty that I could rely on exactly one person in my life, and that person was me. I moved to Charlotte after graduation, got a job at a mid-size firm, built something small but mine, an apartment I loved, a few good friends, a cat named Gerald who has survived 3 apartments and 1 terrible relationship and remains, to this day, the most stable presence in my life. A few years in, I met my husband. I'll call him my husband, because that's what he became, and that's what matters. He's the kind of person who notices when you're quiet and doesn't push, just leaves a glass of water near you like a small offering. He grew up differently than I did. His parents were the kind of parents who showed up. Watching them interact with him in the early years of our relationship was, genuinely, like watching a documentary about a species I didn't know existed. We got engaged in the spring. Nothing elaborate. He asked me in our kitchen, over takeout Thai, and I said yes with pad see you on my chin, which is honestly very on brand for us. The engagement was when things started to shift, or when I started paying attention to the shifting. My parents' reaction was warm in the way February in Charlotte is warm, technically above freezing, but you're not taking your coat off. My mother asked if we'd set a date. My father said he was happy for me. My brother sent a GIF. No one called to ask about the ring, or what he was like, or how I was feeling. My husband's family, his parents, his sister, called within the hour. His mother cried. His father asked to take us to dinner. His sister texted me a paragraph about how she'd always wanted a sister. I remember getting off the phone with his mother and sitting on the kitchen floor for a few minutes, not crying, just very stills. Gerald sat on my feet. I appreciated that. We planned the wedding for the following October, 14 months away. Plenty of notice. My parents were invited, obviously. My brother and his wife were invited. I sent save the dates in January, invitations in June. I followed up with my mother in August. She confirmed they were coming. All of them, my parents, my brother, his wife. 4 seats. My brother's wife is important to this story. not because she did anything particularly cruel, but because of what she represents. She was the daughter-in-law my parents actually wanted. She's the one my mother called on Sundays. She's the one my father helped move into her first apartment. She's the one who got the down payment. In the 6 months between our engagement and our wedding, my parents flew out to Denver, where my brother lives, twice. Once for a long weekend in June, once for a week in September. I know because my mother posted photos on Facebook. I know because she didn't tell me they were going. I found out through social media, both times. Our wedding was in Asheville, North Carolina, 4.5 hours from my parents' house in Virginia. Not a plane ticket, a drive. 3 weeks before the wedding, my mother called me. She said they weren't coming. I remember I was at my desk at work when she called, so I walked to the stairwell and sat on the steps between the 3rd and 4th floor and listened to her tell me that the drive was too far, that my father's knee had been bothering him, that they'd talked about it, and they just didn't think they could make it work. She said it the way you say you can't make it to a birthday party, casual, apologetic in a surface way, the way customer service is apologetic. The words are right, but the feeling isn't there. I said okay. I don't know why I said okay. I think I'd been waiting for it so long that I didn't have a reaction left. It was like expecting a punch and just standing there when it lands, because you already tightened your whole body hours ago. My brother called that evening to tell me he and his wife also wouldn't be making it. Something about a prior commitment. He didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. I didn't cry. I went home, told my husband, and he held me for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "My family will be there." And I knew that was true. And I tried to let that be enough. The wedding was in October on a Saturday afternoon at a small vineyard outside of Asheville that I had been dreaming about for 2 years. The leaves were turning. It was 64 degrees and perfect. My mother-in-law helped me with my veil. My father-in-law walked me down the aisle. I had 2 seats reserved in the front row with small white cards that said Mom and Dad. My mother-in-law asked if she should move them and I said no. I don't know why I said no. I think I needed people to see them. I think I needed it to be visible, the shape of what was missing. My father-in-law gave a toast at the reception that made my husband cry, which made me cry, which made about half the room cry. He talked about what it meant to welcome someone into a family. He didn't mention my parents. He didn't have to. I danced with my husband until my feet hurt. I ate every single thing on my plate. I laughed more than I expected to. At the end of the night, when we were driving to the hotel, I leaned against the car window and thought, I did it. I made something good. And I meant it. The calls started about 3 weeks later. First it was my mother, asking how the honeymoon was, casual, like nothing had happened. I answered politely. I told her it was good. Hawaii, 1 week, my husband had surprised me with the itinerary. She said that sounded nice. Then my father called, which was unusual. My father didn't usually call directly. He operated through my mother. He asked how work was going, how the apartment was, whether we were thinking about buying something. I said things were fine. Then, the following Tuesday, I was at my desk when my assistant told me my father was downstairs. My father, at my office, in Charlotte. Which is, I will remind you, farther from their house than Asheville was. He'd driven there, on a Tuesday. I went down to the lobby, and he was standing near the front desk in his good jacket, the one he wears to church, holding a manila folder. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him. He also looked nervous, which I had almost never seen on my father. He said he wanted to talk. I told the front desk I'd be stepping out, and we walked to a coffee shop across the street. He ordered a coffee. I ordered nothing. We sat down. He put the manila folder on the table between us. He said, "You know your grandfather left some money to the family." I did know this. My grandfather, his father, had passed away when I was 26. He had left a modest estate, mostly the house and some savings. My understanding had always been that it had been handled, distributed, done. My father cleared his throat. He said that my grandfather had in fact left specific instructions. There was a sum set aside. He named the amount, and I will tell you it was not small. It was the kind of number that would change the shape of your life. and that some had been placed in an account jointly managed by my father and my uncle, my grandfather's brother, with the intention that it would be distributed to grandchildren when they married or turned 30, whichever came first. I was 31. I had been married for 3 weeks. My father slid the folder across the table. The folder contained documentation, the account, the balance, the original instructions from my grandfather's estate, and a letter from my uncle. My uncle had been the one to contact my father. He'd seen the wedding announcement. Someone had posted photos, I think, or he'd heard through the family, and he'd asked my father if the distribution had been made. My father had said he was getting to it. My uncle had then contacted an attorney. The letter was from that attorney. It turned out my father had been managing this account for 5 years. My brother had received his distribution when he got married. The amount my father named, which was also the amount of the down payment on his house, that had happened 4 years ago. I had not been told that I was a beneficiary of my grandfather's estate. I had not been told that my brother had already received his share. I had been graduating college and taking out loans and paying them back and building my life brick by brick, while there was money sitting in an account with my name attached to it, and my father had simply not mentioned it. I sat across from my father in that coffee shop, and I looked at him for a long time. He said he knew it should have been handled sooner. He said things got complicated. He said my grandfather's instructions hadn't been entirely clear. He said the words, "I'm sorry," at some point, but they were buried in so much other language that they barely landed. I picked up the folder. I said I needed time to look through everything. He said okay. He said he hoped we could figure this out together as a family. I said, sure. I walked him to his car, watched him drive away, and then I sat in my car in the parking deck for 20 minutes. Then I called a lawyer, not because I was angry. I was angry, but that's not why I called. I called because I had learned a long time ago that feelings are not evidence, and evidence is what you need when you're dealing with people who will rewrite history to protect themselves. My attorney, someone a colleague had recommended, an estate attorney with excellent reviews and zero patience for vague stories, reviewed the documentation. She confirmed what my uncle's attorney had already obvious. The distribution was owed. The account was real. The balance was mine. She also confirmed that the account had been accruing interest for 5 years, during which time I had not received my share. The question of whether my father had drawn on those funds at all, whether money had moved, whether anything was missing, was something she was going to look into. I don't want to turn this into a legal recounting, because honestly, some of it is still ongoing, and I'm not going to say more than I should. What I will tell you is this: the primary distribution was made. My attorney and my uncle's attorney coordinated, and within about 6 weeks, the money reached an account in my name. It was enough to pay off every dollar of my remaining student loans. Enough for a down payment on a home. Enough to rebuild, on a different foundation, the life I had been building out of stubbornness and waitressing jobs and sheer refusal to fail. My husband and I bought a house in February. 3 bedrooms, a yard for Gerald to theoretically enjoy, but actually be suspicious of. A kitchen with enough counter space so that I cried a little bit the first time I cooked in it. I set aside a portion, 10%, my husband's suggestion, to fund a scholarship through a local nonprofit that supports first-generation college students in the Charlotte area. Girls, specifically, who are putting themselves through school without family support. My grandfather, I think, would have liked that, or at least I'm going to tell myself he would have, because I want one good thing to trace back to that side of my family. My mother called in December and asked what I'd gotten my brother for Christmas. That was the whole call. I said I hadn't decided yet. She said, okay, and then we talked about the weather. My father sent a text on New Year's Day that said, Happy New Year. Hope you and my husband's name have a good one. That was it. I have not had a conversation with either of them about what happened. Not a real one. I've been waiting to see if they would bring it up and they haven't. Maybe they're waiting for me to. Maybe they've decided that, because the money was delivered and no one filed anything, it's over. It's not over. I just haven't decided what over looks like yet. What I know is this: I don't owe them monthly money. I don't owe them explanations. I don't owe them a version of myself that pretends none of this happened in exchange for the performance of family at Christmas. I spent a long time making myself small enough to fit into a role they'd assigned me, and I am not interested in doing that anymore. My husband's parents came to visit last month. His mother brought food. Too much food. The way mothers who love you bring too much food. And his father fixed the wobbly hinge on our back gate without being asked. We had dinner at our table in our house with the yard Gerald still hasn't decided about, and at some point I looked across the table at my husband's face and felt something settle in my chest. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was more solid than that. It was the feeling of being in the right place. I touched the ring on my finger. Simple gold band, nothing elaborate. And I thought about my grandfather signing those papers, setting aside that money, believing that someday it would matter to someone. I don't know if he knew what my parents were like. I don't know if he suspected. Maybe he was just a man trying to do something good for the people who came after him, and it got tangled up in other people's smallness. But it found me eventually. It found me 3 weeks after a wedding, where I danced alone on a floor that should have held my family, and it arrived in the form of a manila folder and an attorney and an uncle who noticed and asked the right question. Sometimes the thing that saves you isn't dramatic. Sometimes it's just someone asking, "Hey, wasn't there supposed to be something for her?" And the answer finally being yes.